28. Years after sister vanished, priest follows fallen crucifix to a shocking discovery beneath mansion. They say some wounds don't bleed. They just linger, like a hymn that never quite ends. And in Eldon Hollow, a quiet town where grief echoes louder than celebration, there's one name that still draws breath inside the hearts of the devout: Cecilia Myrek. It's been 28 years since she vanished, along with 3 other nuns, on a spiritual retreat that was meant to last 2 days. They were never found. No screams, no footprints, no goodbyes. And the only person who still listens for them is the man who once encouraged her to walk that path. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Agnes of Mercy, scattering patches of soft color across the empty pews. Father Daniel Mirek stood alone at the altar, his hands trembling slightly beneath his robe, though his voice, when it finally broke the silence, was steady. May the souls of the departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. He made the sign of the cross and bowed his head. A few quiet voices from the congregation followed with, "Amen." But the words sounded worn now, rehearsed, like an old song sung out of habit more than hope. 28 years. That's how long it had been since Cecilia, his younger sister, had disappeared into the northern woods. 28 years of unanswered prayers, cold leads, and theories that had grown more absurd with time. The other 3 women, Sisters Joan, Margaret, and Beatrice, were remembered too. But it was Cecilia whose absence wrapped itself around Daniel's life like an iron chain. As the service ended, he made his way down the aisle, nodding, shaking hands, smiling the way he always did, like a man carved from granite, sturdy and unshakable. But as he looked into the eyes of the elderly Mrs. Howard, who clutched a faded prayer card featuring Sister Joan's face, he felt a familiar pang in his chest. Her voice quivered as she spoke. "She taught my granddaughter her catechism, you know. Still the gentlest soul I ever met." Daniel smiled faintly, the weight of memory pressing harder than ever. She never raised her voice. Not once. And then the woman's lips trembled as she whispered, "Do you think they're really gone, Father? Truly gone?" Daniel hesitated, only for a breath. "I believe they are with God, but I also believe some souls wait to be found." Once the last hand had been shaken and the last condolence offered, Daniel retreated to his office behind the sanctuary. It was a small room, plain walls, old books, a single wooden desk. But it was here that he kept the parts of his heart he couldn't carry in public. He opened the bottom drawer, slow and deliberate, and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, photographs, old, yellowing, but cherished like relics. He stared at the first image, Cecilia, just 23. Her eyes sparkled beneath her veil the day she took her vows. He remembered the way she laughed, soft but unshakably sure, when she told him she felt God more strongly in silence than in sermons. She had always been that way, quiet, but convicted. His voice broke as he whispered, "I was proud of you." A moment passed, then another, and a darker thought crept in, unwelcome but relentless. Would she have lived if I hadn't encouraged her? If I hadn't nurtured her faith, told her that God would walk with her even into the wilderness? The question felt like betrayal, and he cut it off with a sharp breath crossing himself quickly. No, I won't think that. I can't. He set aside her portrait and picked up another photo. This one, of all four nuns, taken just days before they vanished. They sat on a bench outside the now-vanished St. Denis Chapel. Sister Margaret's hands were folded delicately in her lap. Sister Joan's smile was tired but warm. Beatrice, only 28 at the time, seemed relaxed but focused. And Cecilia was looking straight into the camera, her eyes locked onto something beyond the frame. Even now, the image felt alive, like she was still trying to speak through it. Daniel studied the background, the chapel's white walls, the pine trees curling around it like guardians. That photo had been taken just 48 hours before they disappeared. They were supposed to assess the structure and prepare it for possible decommissioning. A simple retreat. Fasting. Prayer. Silence. But what they found in those woods, if anything at all, was never spoken. The official explanation had never satisfied him. A bear attack, they said. No remains. No signs of struggle. No blood. Nothing. Just silence. An ending without a page. Over the years, the rumors had been cruel. That they'd abandoned their vows. That they'd fled to Mexico. That one of them had been pregnant. Lies that crept through the pews like poison. But Daniel knew his sister. Knew her like he knew his own heartbeat. She would never have left. Not without telling him. Not without goodbye. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms to his eyes. "What am I missing?" he asked softly. "What haven't I seen?" But silence offered no answer. He sat there for a long time, long enough for the afternoon light to grow golden and soft. Then, suddenly, without thought or logic, he stood. He didn't pack anything, didn't call anyone. He simply reached for the photograph of the four nuns, slipped it into his coat pocket, grabbed his rosary, and walked out. The church door creaked shut behind him. He slid into his old sedan, placed the photo on the passenger seat beside him, and turned the ignition. The engine rumbled awake, and he whispered a single line, like a man asking permission. "Guide me, Lord. If there's anything left, show me." He didn't know what he was looking for. Closure, maybe, or absolution. Or maybe just the ghost of a girl who once believed that God spoke loudest in silence. But as he pulled out of the church lot and turned toward the road to Shasta, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being led, not by guilt or grief, but by something quieter, older, and far more persistent than either. Something like a whisper from beneath the ground. The road to the Shasta Trinity Forest wound like a question mark through the California hills. Every mile Daniel drove pulled him deeper into a quiet only old towns and old memories seemed to carry. The farther he moved from Eldon Hollow, the thinner the air felt, not because of altitude, but because of what lay ahead. Somewhere at the end of this road was the place where everything had broken. He hadn't been back in over 2 decades. Not since the search had gone cold. Not since they stopped looking. But grief has strange gravity, and today it had pulled him back. It took just over 90 minutes to reach the edge of the forest, but time felt both stretched and compressed as if the past sat in the passenger seat beside him. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally brushing the photograph resting next to him, a touch like prayer. Then the trees thinned, and the land opened to a gated private drive he didn't recognize. Where the dirt path to St. Denis Chapel had once begun, there now stood a towering wrought iron gate, flanked by thick hedges and polished stone pillars. A bold metal sign hung from the center: "No trespassing, private property." Beneath it, smaller plaques warned of surveillance, prosecution, and dogs. Daniel slowed to a stop, disbelief curling through his chest. He checked the photograph again. The ridgeline, the old cedar slope, the angle of the clearing, it all matched. This was the place. But St. Denis was gone. In its place, behind the manicured trees and iron defenses, stood a sprawling estate, barely visible through the brush, modern, luxurious, and completely foreign. A house like that didn't belong to the land. It sat on sacred ground like a monument to forgetting. Daniel stepped out of the car. The cold wind startled him, sharper than expected. He approached the gate cautiously, scanning for any call box or sign of a caretaker. There was none. But just as he reached for the bars, a sound behind him made him turn. The private driveway curved away through the trees, and walking up from its direction was a man in his 60s. Tall, lean, dressed in sleek running attire, with a large German shepherd at his side. His silver hair was neatly cut, and his face was sharp, like a man used to control. The dog growled low at the sight of Daniel's collar. "You're trespassing?" the man said flatly, eyes narrowing. Daniel offered a disarming smile. "My name is Father Daniel Myrick. I'm from St. Agnes of Mercy in Eldon Hollow. I didn't mean to intrude, but I—" "You already have," the man snapped, not extending his hand. "What do you want?" Daniel kept his tone calm, respectful. "This property, this used to be the site of St. Denis Chapel. My sister, along with 3 other nuns, disappeared from here 28 years ago. Today is the anniversary. I hoped to just stand on the grounds for a moment. That's all." The man's expression darkened. His grip on the dog's leash tightened. "The chapel's gone. Has been for decades. Nothing left to see here." "I understand," Daniel said gently. "I only found out recently that the chapel was demolished. No one from the diocese ever informed me." "You should take that up with them. This land belongs to me now, and I don't allow religious visitors." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "I don't mean to challenge your boundaries. I just—" "Enough," the man said, voice cold steel. "I sleep better without that damn bell ringing every day. All that noise, ritual, incense, muttering Latin. Useless." Daniel blinked. "You knew the bell?" "I tore it down myself." A silence fell between them, thick with unspoken fury. Daniel took a breath. "What's your name, sir?" "Redfield. Conrad Redfield. And this is your last warning. If you're not gone in 2 minutes, I'll call the sheriff." Daniel nodded slowly. "Understood." He turned back toward his car, shoulders stiff, pulse still steady. But inside, something roiled. Not just disappointment, not just frustration, but something colder. He didn't like the way Redfield had spoken. Not just the hostility, but the precision. The way he'd said that damn bell. Like it had haunted him. As Daniel slid back into the driver's seat, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Redfield was still watching him, motionless, dog at his side, a figure carved in granite. He started the engine, hands shaking just slightly. Then it happened. The car radio, which he hadn't touched since Eldon Hollow, crackled to life. A low static hiss, then, clear and distinct, a voice began to sing. It was a hymn, not just any hymn. Gregorian chant, Salve Regina. Daniel stared at the dashboard, heart lurching. He reached to turn it off, but the radio was already off. The power light was dark, yet the sound continued, haunting, distant, unmistakable. He felt it then, that pull, not of logic, not of superstition, but of purpose, the kind that lives between grief and faith, between doubt and revelation. He whispered, "Lord, what are you showing me?" Outside the windshield, the trees swayed in the wind. The air had changed. There was no fog, no thunder, no cinematic signal from heaven, just a stillness that wasn't there before. And the chant, so soft now, lingered like a breath caught between two lives. He turned the steering wheel slightly, not back toward Eldon Hollow, but alongside the fence, because he wasn't done. Not yet. The forest air had thickened with something more than mist, something Daniel couldn't name. He had driven slowly along the perimeter of the property, the road narrowing as tall pines leaned inward, their branches whispering in a language older than Scripture. The iron fence followed the terrain's curves, steady and elegant, its black bars casting long, crooked shadows across the dirt. And then, just past a bend where the earth sloped upward, Daniel saw a break in the line. He stepped out of the car. The silence here was heavier, somehow. Not the gentle hush of prayer, but the sort that clings to places that were meant to be remembered, and instead have been erased. At his feet, moss crept along the base of the fence. One of the support posts had loosened, its concrete footing cracked, perhaps by rain or tree roots. A small gap had formed, just enough. Daniel hesitated. This wasn't a decision he wanted to make lightly. He was a priest, a man of law and of conscience. But this wasn't about law anymore. It was about something else, something sacred. He looked back down the road. No cars, no people, only trees. He crossed himself. "Forgive me," he whispered, then dropped to one knee and slid carefully through the opening. The land on the other side was manicured. Every tree, every stone, every hedge had been placed with intention. But it was too clean, too ordered. It lacked the soul of a place of worship. This was landscaping, not liturgy. He moved quietly, sticking close to the hedgerows, until he reached what he remembered as the chapel's footprint. The shape was gone, but the memory of it, its size, its dimensions, lived in his bones. He had stood here once before, not as a priest, but as a brother. Cecilia had smiled at him from the chapel steps, hands clasped, veil fluttering. That image had anchored him all these years. And now, standing in that same place, there was nothing left. No stones, no markings, no sign that anything holy had ever stood here. Daniel's breath caught as his shoe brushed against something metal hidden beneath a shrub. He crouched, pushed the leaves aside, and stared. It was a vent, circular, old, rusted, and it didn't belong. The design was ornate, iron filigree, like something from the 1930s. It didn't match the sleek, modern aesthetic of Redfield's estate. And more than that, it hummed. Daniel leaned closer. The hum wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the low thrum of a generator or a heating system. It was softer, like air being drawn through from deep below. Then he froze. A sound drifted upward, so faint he thought it might be in his mind. But it came again. A cough, followed by humming, not machine humming, human. A voice, off-key, fragile, but real. His blood went cold. "Hello?" he called, voice cracking. He pressed his ear to the vent. The humming continued, then faded. Whoever it was, they couldn't hear him. Daniel stumbled back from the vent, heart pounding. He reached for his phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered after 2 rings. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Father Daniel Myrick. I'm on private property just outside Eldon Hollow, near where St. Denis Chapel used to stand. I think someone is underground. A pause. I'm sorry, did you say underground? Yes, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. There's an old vent. I can hear someone through it. They're humming and coughing. I don't know how else to say this. I think someone's trapped beneath the earth. Another pause. This one longer. Are you on the property legally, sir? No, he admitted. I found a break in the fence. I crossed through. I know that was wrong, but this seems urgent. The dispatcher's voice softened slightly. Understood. We're dispatching officers now. Please remain at your current location, unless you feel you're in danger. Thank you, Daniel said. I'll wait. He hung up and stared at the vent, willing it to make another sound. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, humming again. Just a note or two, but enough to send a chill through him. He backed away slowly and made his way back toward the fence, slipping through the opening once more and returning to his car. The trees didn't move. The breeze had stopped, and for the first time since leaving the church, he felt afraid. Not for himself, but for what he had just heard. 28 years of silence. And now, a voice, a hymn, a human breath beneath the soil. Something had survived. Something was waiting. And now that it had been heard, it could no longer be ignored. The patrol car appeared like a whisper through the trees. No siren, only lights flickering in the distance as it wound its way up the narrow forest road. Daniel watched from the driver's seat, palms pressed flat on his thighs, trying to still the trembling that hadn't stopped since the voice in the vent. Behind the veil of composure, he wore like a collar. Something in him had cracked open. An old wound made raw by possibility. 28 years of nothing. Now, humming, coughing, breath. The car pulled up beside him and parked. 2 officers stepped out. One older, sturdy, his hair peppered with gray and eyes hard with habit. The other younger, sharper, his movements coiled with energy. The older man approached first, eyes steady but not unkind. Father Daniel Myrick? He asked. Daniel nodded. Thank you for coming. I know this sounds strange. We've heard stranger, the officer said. I'm Deputy Hale. This is Deputy Lewis. Dispatch said something about someone underground? Daniel pointed across the road, toward the broken section of fence and the stretch of manicured land beyond. There's an old air vent just beyond the clearing. I didn't know what I'd find. But I heard someone, a woman, I think, humming, coughing. It wasn't just in my head. Hale exchanged a glance with his partner, who was already stepping closer to inspect the fence. You entered the property? Hale asked. I did, through a break in the fence. I know that's trespassing, but I didn't go looking for trouble. I went looking for closure. And what I found? His voice faltered. If you hear what I heard, you'll understand why I couldn't walk away. The deputies said nothing for a moment. Then Lewis nodded toward the gap. Let's take a look. The three men moved cautiously through the opening. The air inside the property felt heavier now, as if the trees themselves had grown still. They followed Daniel's lead through the hedges to the place where the chapel once stood. Daniel stepped aside and gestured toward the shrubs. There, he said quietly. Deputy Hale knelt, parted the brush, and leaned in. The grate was still there, still humming. And then, clearer this time, carried on a gentle rise of air, came the sound again. A voice, wavering, thin, singing, Salve Regina. The officers froze. Deputy Lewis bent lower, his face taut with disbelief. That's not a recording, he whispered. No, Daniel replied. It's a person. They stayed like that for several moments, listening. The voice faded. A cough echoed up through the vent. Dry, strained, real. Lewis stood slowly. We need to escalate this. Hale pulled out his radio and relayed their findings in clipped, careful terms. Words like possible entrapment, unknown subterranean structure, immediate welfare concern, protocol. But beneath that, Daniel could sense it, the shift. This wasn't a priest with grief-fueled delusions anymore. This was a scene, and someone, God help them, was alive beneath their feet. The decision came quickly. We need access to the main residence, Hale said. If someone's being held underground, the homeowner will have answers, or at least questions to answer. They moved back through the fence and drove the short distance to the main gate. Within minutes, they were standing at the foot of Conrad Redfield's grand home. The sky above had darkened slightly, clouds curling in with evening like an omen. Daniel stayed back near the patrol car as the deputies approached the door. But Redfield didn't come to the door. He came from behind the house, still in his athletic wear, still gripping the leash of his dog, but his expression now twisted into a mask of frustration and simmering rage. What is this? He barked, storming toward them. I told this man to leave. Now he brings the police? Hale raised a hand calmly. Mr. Redfield, we're responding to a welfare concern. We've received credible indication that someone may be on your property, possibly underground. We need to ask you some questions. Redfield scoffed. Absolutely not. This is harassment. He's a priest who doesn't like that I bought church land. Probably brought some Bluetooth speaker, played a chant, and called you. We all heard it, Lewis said quietly. It wasn't a recording. I don't care what you think you heard, Redfield snapped. There's no one here but me and my dogs. Hale stepped forward. Then you won't mind if we take a look, with your permission. Redfield's eyes burned. I do mind. You're not stepping inside without a warrant. Daniel watched from a distance, heart sinking. He could feel it slipping, the momentum, the chance. But then Hale spoke again, voice firm. Mr. Redfield, if someone is in distress on your property and you prevent us from checking, you may be obstructing a welfare investigation. That's not a good place to be. Redfield stood still, jaw clenched, knuckles white around the leash. Then he spoke, teeth barely moving. There's a shed, tools, lawn equipment. That's all. You want to look there? Fine, but don't touch my house. The group moved along the winding path behind the house, deeper into the trees. The tool shed appeared after a few minutes, a plain wooden structure, larger than expected, tucked beneath the canopy like something forgotten. Redfield stood off to the side, arms crossed, fuming. Lewis opened the door. Inside, gardening tools, a push mower, bags of soil. Dust coated everything. Nothing seemed out of place until he dropped a wrench. The sound it made, thud, hollow thud, rang different. Lewis knelt quickly and tapped the floor. This panel was newer. He looked up at Hale. There's something beneath this. Redfield took a step forward. This is outrageous. Step back, sir, Hale warned. They pulled the panel away, and there it was, a staircase, stone, descending. Cold air rose up from the dark. Daniel stepped closer, unable to stop himself. His pulse pounded in his ears. The officers drew their flashlights, exchanged a silent glance, and started down the steps. And Daniel prayed, out loud, under his breath, fingers wrapped around his rosary like an anchor, that what waited below would not be death, but some echo of life. A whisper, a hand, a voice he once knew. The first step into the dark was a kind of surrender. Deputy Hale's flashlight cut through the dust-heavy air like a blade, revealing a stone staircase carved directly into the earth. The walls were damp. The temperature dropped with each descent. Wooden beams, old but intact, lined the tunnel at intervals. The deeper they moved, the more the silence changed. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the presence of something hidden, something long buried, and never meant to be found. Daniel followed close behind, barely breathing, clutching his rosary like it was the last thread tethering him to the present. He had asked for closure. Now, he felt as though he were descending into the very place grief was born. At the bottom of the staircase was a heavy wooden door, ancient-looking, iron hinges crusted with rust, but intact. Deputy Lewis ran his fingers over the frame and found no lock, but a small hollow carved into the side wall. Inside it, wrapped in old cloth, was a key. He exchanged a glance with Hale. This was meant to be hidden. They unlocked the door. The groan of the hinges echoed like thunder in that narrow shaft, and when the door swung open, the beam of their flashlights revealed what lay beyond. A chamber, rough stone walls, a low ceiling held aloft by wooden struts. On one side, a crude bed, a thin mattress laid directly on the floor. Next to it, a small table with a candle long since burned to wax. Scraps of food containers, old cloth, dust, and on that bed, curled like something trying to make itself disappear, was a woman. She didn't move when the light first touched her, but slowly, cautiously, her head turned toward them. Her face was gaunt, cheeks sunken, eyes too large for the frame they rested in. Her hair, once golden, now gray and cut short with rough edges. Her lips were cracked, but moving. Lewis stepped forward carefully, kneeling. "Ma'am, my name is Deputy Lewis. We're here to help you. Can you tell us your name?" The woman blinked, as if dragging her consciousness back through years of fog. Then, with a voice barely louder than breath, she said, "Cecilia, Cecilia Myrick." Daniel fell to his knees. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Not of her face. That had been changed by time, malnutrition, and darkness. But her voice was the same. The one that had called him Daniel at age 7 when she skinned her knee. The one that hummed while she gardened. The one that whispered morning prayers beneath the chapel rafters. He could not speak, only weep. Officers moved quickly, alerting medical responders and clearing space for extraction. But Daniel remained frozen, his eyes locked on her. Her own gaze drifted, unfocused, like she was looking through him, but then stopped. Her lips moved again. "Is he real?" she asked, to no one in particular. "I'm real," Daniel choked out. "I'm here, Cecilia. I never stopped." Something flickered in her eyes, something deeper than memory, something sacred. In the minutes that followed, the room filled with movement, paramedics arriving, stretchers lowered, lights flashing, radios crackling. But Daniel barely noticed any of it. His entire world had collapsed to the fragile figure on that mattress, and the sound of her voice breaking through 28 years of earth and stone. As Cecilia was lifted onto the stretcher, she resisted briefly, clutching a wooden object close to her chest. A rosary, hand-carved, worn, smooth, strung together with bits of string, cloth, and what looked like dried plant fiber. She wouldn't let it go. "Let her keep it," Daniel said, voice firmer now. The paramedics nodded. She was wheeled out gently, her eyes fluttering against the harsh light. Daniel followed in silence, only turning back when he heard an officer call from deeper in the chamber. "Sir, you'll want to see this." He walked to the far end of the tunnel, where a second small alcove had been carved from the rock. On a low bed, nothing more than a folded blanket and bones, lay a skeleton, wrapped in the tattered remains of a nun's habit. Deputy Hale's face was grim. "We believe this is Sister Beatrice." Daniel nodded once, throat burning. "There's more," the deputy said. He motioned to the walls. Daniel looked up. Every inch of stone had been etched, carved, or marked. Crosses, verses from Psalms, scenes from the Gospels, the Lord's Prayer, written in Latin, all of it done by hand, scratched into stone with what must have been broken pottery, fingernails, or worse. It wasn't decoration. It was survival. Cecilia had kept herself alive, not just through prayer, but through creation, through remembrance, through the physical act of faith when everything else had been stripped away. By the time they emerged from the shed into the pale light of early night, the scene outside had shifted. Police cruisers lined the property. Redfield stood in cuffs, surrounded by officers. His face was ashen, his defiance hollowed out. As Daniel passed, Redfield lunged forward. "Proud of yourself, Father?" he spat, his face twisting with something that was neither anger nor sorrow. Only hate. "You had to ruin it, didn't you?" Daniel met his eyes, calm, cold. "No," he said. "I didn't ruin anything. I reclaimed what you tried to bury." Redfield tried to snarl a response, but the officers pulled him back and led him toward a cruiser. Daniel turned away, his gaze fixed on the ambulance now preparing to leave. Inside, Cecilia lay pale and trembling beneath a blanket. But she was alive, alive. As the doors shut, and the sirens rose like a strange echo of hymnals long forgotten. Daniel finally exhaled. The darkness had not won. Not this time. The emergency room at Shasta General was lit with a cold, relentless fluorescence that made everything, walls, skin, time, feel paler than it should. The ambulance pulled in fast, quiet, decisive. Paramedics moved swiftly as they transferred Cecilia's fragile form into the building. Her limbs looked impossibly thin beneath the blanket. Her face, worn, translucent, almost hollow, still clung to the shape of the girl Daniel remembered, but it was her eyes that held him frozen. They were open, watching, recognizing. Daniel and Harold Griggs arrived seconds later in the caretaker's rusted pickup, skidding into the far end of the lot, heart still hammering from everything that had just unfolded. But when they tried to follow the gurney, a nurse intercepted them. "I'm sorry," she said gently but firmly. "She's in extremely fragile condition. We need to stabilize her before anyone can visit." "I'm her brother," Daniel said, breathless. "She's been missing for 28 years. Please, just a moment." The nurse hesitated, then softened. "We'll do everything we can, I promise. There's a waiting room just down the hall. Someone will come to get you." So they waited. The clock ticked. The vending machine buzzed. Daniel sat hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees, the wooden rosary still in his fingers. Harold said nothing, just sat beside him, eyes on the linoleum. There was too much weight in the air for casual conversation. Finally, Harold spoke. "It's a miracle," he said, voice rough with awe. "After all these years, to find her alive." Daniel didn't look up. "A miracle," he repeated, "but not without cost." His mind swirled with fragments, bones on a blanket, crosses carved into stone, the cracked whisper of her name. He had prayed for closure, yes. But this? This wasn't closure. This was resurrection. A woman in scrubs entered, clipboard in hand. "Father Mirek?" He stood immediately. "I'm Dr. Chen," she said. "I'm overseeing your sister's care. You can come with me, but I need to prepare you. Her body has been through profound trauma, severe malnutrition, muscle atrophy, compromised immune response. She hasn't seen natural light in years. Even low room lighting is a strain on her eyes." Daniel nodded, already moving to follow. "She's conscious," Dr. Chen added. "Not fully lucid at all times, but she's asked for you." The hallway to the ICU felt longer than the tunnel beneath Redfield's estate. When Daniel stepped inside the room, he had to pause. Machines hummed. Monitors blinked. The air smelled like antiseptic and hope in equal measure. Cecilia lay beneath white sheets, her body looking impossibly small, framed by sterile steel and plastic. But when her eyes found his, and they did, instantly, something ancient and unbreakable passed between them. "Daniel," she whispered. Her voice was fragile, like paper, but it held shape, identity. He stepped closer, pulling the mask tighter across his face. The gown and gloves made him feel like a ghost, but he reached out anyway and gently took her hand. It was cold, but it closed around his. "I never stopped looking," he said, "not for a single year." She smiled weakly. "I knew you'd come." Daniel dropped to his knees beside her bed, forehead pressed gently against the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have found you sooner." But Cecilia shook her head, barely, but enough. God's timing, she murmured. Always perfect. He nodded, tears slipping freely down his cheeks. You held on. You stayed alive. Her cracked lips twitched into something that could almost be called a grin. Someone had to remember. When the nurse stepped in and tapped his shoulder, Daniel knew what it meant. The visit was over, for now, but he leaned close one more time and whispered, "Rest. I'll be here. I won't leave. Not again." As he stepped out into the corridor, his knees buckled slightly, and Harold caught him under the elbow. "You all right?" Harold asked. "I need the chapel," Daniel said. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can just be." Harold pointed down the hall. "Hospital has one. Small, non-denominational, but it's something." Daniel found it easily. It was a modest room. No altar, no stained glass, but still, it carried silence. And silence, he had learned, was holy. He dropped to the padded kneeler, eyes closed, breath shaking. "Thank you," he said aloud, "for this moment, for her survival, for not letting me stop searching." He didn't ask for more, didn't demand answers, didn't curse the delay. He simply sat in that quiet room and gave thanks for a whisper in a vent, for a carved cross in stone, for a sister whose spirit had outlasted cruelty. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw the name, Deputy Hale. Daniel answered quickly, "I'm at the hospital." "She's safe?" the deputy asked. "She's alive and lucid, God knows how." Hale exhaled. "I wanted to update you. We've begun our review of Redfield's house. There's a lot." Daniel's stomach clenched. "What kind of lot? Journals? Dozens of them, diaries really, written over decades, obsessive detail? His hatred for the church, for women in religious life, for your sister, specifically." Daniel closed his eyes. "He kept notes on how he abducted them," Hale continued. "He posed as a neighbor, bringing tea during their retreat, drugged them, waited until they were drowsy, moved them in the night, cleaned everything." Daniel's mouth went dry. "Why?" "There's a theory. His mother left him as a child, joined a convent. He was raised by a deeply abusive grandmother who beat him in the name of God. Everything twisted in his mind. Nuns weren't caregivers. They were traitors. There was silence on both ends of the line. "Father," Hale said quietly, "your sister's survival was not an accident. It wasn't just biology. She resisted, with faith, with memory. She kept herself alive when no one else could." Daniel nodded, even though the deputy couldn't see him. "She did. I saw it in her eyes." "She may never be the same," Hale added. "She doesn't have to be," Daniel said. "She just has to be free." They ended the call, and Daniel returned to the waiting room, where a nurse was already approaching with a clipboard and a mask for him. "You can see her again," she said. "She asked for you. She asked if the church still stood." Daniel smiled beneath the mask as he followed her. "It does," he whispered. "It's been waiting for her." Inside the room, Cecilia turned toward him once more. "Is it strong?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "The church?" Daniel replied. "It's bruised, it's weathered, but the gates of hell haven't prevailed." A single tear rolled down her cheek. She nodded once, and then she slept. Daniel stayed at her side that night, hand in hand, as the machines blinked and the world outside turned quietly toward morning. The darkness had tried. It had almost won, but a song had survived, and it had led him home.